So, should you hire new staff people during a recession? Well, now hold it, Todd. Now, we don't even really know if we're in a recession. I mean, it honestly, in these days, it does kind of depend on who you talk to. Some people say we are in a recession. We've been in a recession for a few months. Other people say, no, it's not really a recession. I don't know. And that's really not important. What I want to talk about here is what to do when there's economic uncertainty. And I think we can all agree that at least right now, there's a little bit of uncertainty going on about what's going to be happening in the economy for the next year or two even. So I wanted to address kind of from our perspective what we think churches should be doing. And really, whether we're in a recession or we're not is kind of a technical point. But here's the truth. There are seasons and there are cycles in everything, and that includes the economy. And you need to be prepared. It's always easy to be prepared for the top of that cycle, but it's a little bit more difficult when that cycle starts to dip. So people obviously are key. Most churches, their staff budgets are it's their biggest expense, right? It's your biggest expense, probably 50%. Some churches are higher, some churches are a little bit lower. But people are key, and it's really important that you have a plan for both the high times and the low times. The most important thing that I'm going to tell you is you really need to have a plan. If you stick around toward the end of this video here, I'm going to have two things that I'm going to offer you at the end. But let's talk just a little bit about it. Here's one thing that I think you shouldn't do, okay? Before we get to the whole should I hire staff or not. This is not the time to panic, right? We say this a lot in our work at Chemistry Staffing. This is not a surprise to God, so it really shouldn't be a surprise to us. Nothing is really a surprise to God, but we sometimes get a little bit more surprised than we need to. The verse that everybody always states, and I'm going to state it here as well, comes out in Matthew 6:34. NIV says, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." That's encouraging, isn't it? And then it even gets more encouraging. It says, "Each day has enough trouble of its own," right? So the thing here is that we have to be prudent. And I think the verse also helps us that we shouldn't be unduly anxious, right? Because going back to this is not something that God is surprised about, and He actually tells us not to worry. But we do need to be prudent, right? And there's verses about that too. Proverbs 14, in verse 15, it says, "The simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps." And that goes back to this idea of during times, good times and bad times, you need to have a plan. You just have to have a plan. And that goes as particularly important to have a plan when you're talking about probably northwards of half of your church budget in the next 365 days is going to be spent on staff. So you need to have a plan. All right, so what do churches normally do during recessions? Sometimes they worry and they're not prudent, right? They go totally against what those last two verses said. But some churches are all over the place. But here would be my advice to you. And this isn't because I'm a co-founder of a church staffing company, but don't immediately go here. Don't immediately go to a hiring freeze, okay? Because if you just do an overall hiring freeze, that's more worry than anything. Okay. But you do have to pivot. You may have to make some pivots. You have to prioritize. And this goes back to the plan. You have to prioritize, what the long-term goals are for your church, what your long-term vision is, and maybe what some of the short-term things are. The Harvard Business Review came out recently, and they interviewed 4,700 companies. And I know companies are different than churches, but in some ways they're not. Interviewed 4,700 companies over the last 3 periods of recession in the United States. And here's what they found, is that most companies did cut back somewhat, but they did so very selectively. And it's what the Harvard Business Review called having a progressive focus. Okay, that might mean that you hire and downsize at the same time. But it's not a total don't hire. It's not a total freeze in hiring. Again, you're looking at short-term goals. What do you actually have to have right now? What can wait? You're looking at longer-term goals. When this cycle ends, what are do we continue to move forward with this program or this vision? And if so, how do we staff for that now, even during this uncertain time? You might have to consider some different alternatives. I mean, it might mean less hours for some people. It might mean less money. It might mean less staff. It might mean that you have to combine different positions here and there. It might mean that instead of hiring a full-time person, maybe you hire some freelancers or an independent contractor, something like that. But those are different alternatives and different focuses to look at, rather than just saying we're not going to hire at all. We're going to go through a hiring freeze, because what that does is it puts everybody's priorities on the same level, and that's not necessarily what's going to be good for your church or good for your organization. Okay, so save costs where you can, and this time it's different, right? Because normally a recession includes high unemployment, and there are a lot of employees out there. We don't have that this time around, but we do have some pretty decent inflation going on, which means that it's hard to save some costs in other areas. But are there other areas that you can cut back on, other things that you don't need short term? Maybe you can start to sacrifice some of those things. What do you need immediately? That's kind of what comes in when you work on a plan. So those are just some initial thoughts. Now, I told you that if you watch to the end of this video, I have two different things that I would like to offer you. Number one is just, man, this is what we do all day long, every day, is we talk with churches. We have a really unique perspective in the churches that we talk to that are going through their hiring. So we're learning, we learned so much during the last 3 years, and the trends and things that are still happening coming out of the last 3 years. And we're learning a lot more about how churches are budgeting and how they're hiring, even during this economic time. So if you would like to kind of tap into that kind of our unique perspective, we would love to spend, for your church, we would love to spend 30 minutes with you just on a Zoom call, answer any questions you might have about hiring, maybe some questions you have, maybe some budget questions, maybe some staff structure questions that you have. We've got a team of people that know the church, that have done this before, that have been in your shoes, and can share the perspective not only of their expertise, but also the perspective that we're learning from a lot of other churches. So that's the first thing. If you would like to spend 30 minutes with somebody on our team, I want to offer that to you as just a way for you and your church to be able to connect with us, and for us to try and help you however we can. The second way is we're going to dive into this whole topic of, should I hire staff at my church during an uncertain economic time? I'm going to be providing a webinar on Thursday, November 10th at 1 o'clock Eastern. And you can click on the link to be able to sign up. It's free. But we're gonna unpack this a little bit. What kind of a plan do I need? What should I consider? What do I do when I get a resignation? What do I do when I have to downsize because of some economic forces? All of those kind of things. We're going to talk about how to develop a plan, your plan of action. And this is going to be a plan of action really that's going to be good for the rest of this year, 2022. And we're going to try and move you through a plan through 2023 as well. So if you're interested in that, click the link down below and sign up for that webinar, and I will see you there. Again, it's Thursday, November 10th, 2022. And again, if you'd like to grab 30 minutes just to kind of consult with one of our team members, doesn't cost you a thing. We'd love the opportunity to talk and to speak in and to share anything and help in any way that we can. So you can click that link down below as well. Thanks so much. Have a great day.